podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead Podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Before we get into this week's show or this recording, just wanted to say thank you for listening and supporting this creative project and work. I know I've been mentioning the expansion or adjustments or changes coming to what I've been doing here. And, life on life's terms means that process is sometimes slower than one expects. However, my thought and ambition is that what comes of this in the near future will be good and it'll be valuable, be exciting. The thing, though, that I want to get on your radar is that I may be changing the feeds and some other things. So if you do listen to the show regularly and you enjoy the conversations, especially me and Majestic have, it's a pretty good chance by the start of the new year, Good Brothers will sail on its own ship, and or all of this will move to a slightly different feed, which may end up only being the feed that you're already listening to, just changing names. But just putting that on your radar. So with that, thank you for listening, and let's get into the show. Peace. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
Hey, what's happening today? How you feeling?
Oh, man, fair to middling, as them kind of terms that like black people say that you don't hear no more. That, you know what I mean? They're like slowly going out of our collective lexicon.
Absolutely.
Like fair to middling.
Fair to middling for an old fool. That's what my nana used to say. Oh, yeah. Fair to middling for an old fool. I'd be like, go ahead, Nana.
Right. Like this, little slick ass language. But yeah, so I'm fair to middle. And for all the people congregating with their families, fair to middling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I wanted to tap on today. You shared with me two posts from a blog, and I put the link in the show notes for the Cornerside Yard blog spot. And I guess the brother from Chicago and writes about Chicago things, but I think from sort of like a economics, neighborhood kind of perspective.
Urbanism, yeah. Like broadly, like really talking about urbanism and kind of what that looks like, and because often, and not to go too deep into this, but often urbanism is kind of framed like for white people, and we're usually responding to the ideas of what's happening via urbanism. So if it's urbanism for, what they call like tactical urbanism to like, make parking spaces into something. And then then some of us say, hey man, you're taking the parking space from the old lady that needed to go to the doctor. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, or urbanism is bike lanes. And then we're saying, hey, we don't want no bike lanes because bike lanes ain't for us.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I want to take a brief moment to say to everyone listening, Black people ride bikes too.
Yeah.
Black people ride bikes that have money. Black people ride bikes that don't have money. Right? And we have to get out this idea that Black folks don't ride bikes, or for some reason that a bike lane would be only for white people in the PSA part. Go ahead.
Absolutely. That's peace. Well, I thought one, thank you for sharing these with me, but it brought a couple things that I thought would be really good for us to talk about. Because so many of our conversations when we're talking about societal, one from a society change perspective, to a visioning and Black excellence and economic prosperity and some of these other things, sharing abundance, what have you, all these things sort of end up getting into this conversation around sometimes said, unsaid around one way class shows up in our community. And I always think our relative kind of gap places and spaces of social economic class are. I don't think they don't behave the same as other communities. I think for sure. And I think the dollar numbers between sort of like, oh, we would, and then even I think there's an idea, I think oddly, of sort of like one's perception of yourself. So even if you didn't necessarily have any money, that was much different than other people. You may have sensibilities, right? Depending on how your folks, that you come from and are around, situated themselves, and not, and I'm not saying that with any kind of negative aspersion, just that, some folks, they comported themselves a certain way. Maybe whether they, that we could sometimes tie to their relative wealth, that maybe was not that, right, or at least may have had connections, as they say, folks got different types of home training and whatever have you. And then also in light of this being the week of Thanksgiving, that I think is of the national, of the kind of national activities, and I want to say this, that one, just in case anyone listening doesn't know, both the people speaking here are fully aware of the what the historical misinformation and misstructure that is the Thanksgiving holiday, as it was often, I don't know, I guess apparently with that teacher in California recently showed, still probably taught around our indigenous brothers and sisters, or sovereign tribal communities, and and the history of this land, and particularly the engagements with the folks known as the Pilgrims. We all in the loop on that, and as someone who has established an over 20-year tradition of not participating, and do either, if I do make some food, or we do our thing. If we do it on Friday, because we do participate in the traditional African American holiday of, we all got the weekend off. Come see your auntie and them, and let's be happy to be together. And we didn't have no conversations about no pilgrims. We didn't make no negative, definitely no disrespectful, at least not my family, no disrespectful art. Talk about this is what the indigenous people, this is what they was doing. We ain't do none of that. So I know I've seen TV movies at least where people got all kinds of wild stuff they be doing. I'm like, wow, is that a thing? Like, people are here making the decorations and having the kids make really terrible. Anyway, still just, and I actually, oddly enough, I came across something on the internet. I'm going along on the intro here, but there was something called Ragamuffin Day that was like a pre-30s or kind of thing. And like before Halloween was like a real national holiday, and like white folks would have kids dress up like as what they considered poor people and go around like asking. I had never heard of this. I was like, oh, so many layers of the wildness y'all was into. I'm like, damn, y'all, somebody stuck them 2 pages of history together. I was like, man, y'all be tripping. So saying that to say, often U.S. holidays in our country, and sometimes another country, but there's some that have some odd, some negative, some history to them that we're not here to further. However, the like I said, the traditional way that these things play out in our communities is like usually one of the holidays where, regardless of folks' particular religious or cultural practice, spiritual practice, whatever have you, that everyone would feel more compelled, like if you were in a certain, depending on how your family worked and functioned, where either you would be asked to come over to some family member's home and be part of the meal, or you would maybe go and see multiple family or friends, to be with them and break bread and be happy to see each other, and people tell stories and have adult beverages and cards get played and all sorts of things. But and also with that though, I think there's certain dynamics of how class functions in Black communities that shows up right? If it didn't show up any other time of the year, right? Like it might show up maybe on like a 4th of July cookout, you know what I mean, or a family reunion. But those aren't things that are necessarily, they're not the same, right?
Right. And let me say real quick about what distinguishing thing of July the 4th and Thanksgiving for Black folks is this. Everybody got the same clothes on July the 4th, but somebody got a fur coat on for Thanksgiving. So therefore, class, or if you got a check from somewhere, if you fell in a supermarket or whatever, you know what I mean? It's gonna come. Class is gonna be so obvious.
Yes.
Thanksgiving even differently than July 4th. July 4th, somebody can maybe bring a drop top or something.
Right. But
it's different.
Yeah. Thanksgiving is when the fur coat, I think is just bang, you hit it right on the head. You know what I'm saying? Or the one I was like, we're not sitting at the table. We're just gonna, okay. I'm just making my own. Like I just find, because I know you've been to where you go to the things, the meal or the place, and it's like it's all this food, it is all these people, but it's not totally clear. Like, do I just get a plate and just tuck in where I could tuck in? Like, how does this work? I don't want to break no rules, and all that food looks good. I want to get my plate, but I don't want to make a mess. Like, and then somebody say, "No, baby, y'all come over here and sit in the kitchen. Y'all gonna sit." They get like, especially when you're little, because you'd be like 8 or 9, you'd be about to make a mess, and somebody will give you somewhere. They'll set you up. You know what I'm saying? They'd be like, "You want some of this? Oh, no, come on, get you something." And then they give you a little spot so you can tuck in and eat. You know what I'm saying? And so, so setting the context, that's kind of where I wanted to enter this. And but so to what the actual blog post was about, and the brother, I want to go up here.
Pete Saunders.
One love Pete Saunders. I'm gonna send Pete Saunders a tweet or something. Tell him thank you for writing this piece. And the concept, he frames it in talking about Chicago and the Love Jones paradox, right? And I'm a big fan of Love Jones. It's great. I recently watched it, and sometime in the last 4 or 5 months, I still enjoyed it for a number of reasons, which we'll save for another conversation. But the particular way he frames it is sort of the idea of like within that structure of that movie, you kind of have a snapshot of, what we would definitely say were middle class Black people, who probably, even maybe not, affluent, like, oh man, they don't got to work no more, but definitely like they wasn't worried about the light staying on, and moving in what you definitely got to feel was a very Black kind of creative, I'm saying, nice, bars with fluorescent lighted bar countertops and shit, and jazzy. But it felt real. Like, oh man, they doing a thing, man. I want to go kick it where they kicking it, right? Kind of energy. Right. You know what I'm saying? Nice looking cocktails, white linen tablecloths, and then playing out, the romantic realities that happen, in the lives of people. But was clearly, it was not the backdrop of their circumstance was not driven by poverty or struggle, right? And so within the context of the piece, though, the piece isn't really about the movie in that way. The piece is about that sort of, if you have more means, and so maybe you want to have, certain kind of restaurants, bars, entertainment things, markets that have products, that may be more expensive, whatever, recreational things, that it's not always something that if you are Black in a lot of cities, a lot of municipalities, a lot of parts of the country, where you could engage in that, in maybe with the predominant either presence in that space also being Black people, or it be driven and owned by Black people. And the paradox he poses in the piece is a hood affluent versus reflected privilege, which in my paraphrase would be the sort of like you can have your income where it's at, and relatively be able to hold space sort of like in your community, but not have access to some of these other things that you would like. Or you could move into a place where either you could move to a community or an area of a city or what have you that may have some of those, you want to be able to walk from your house to like a hip bar and have a nice, cocktail and an appetizer. But it probably is going to be a predominantly, white middle class or white upper class, space, what I'm saying, in terms of the framing or the ownership or whatever have you. And so that being sort of the reflected privilege, meaning that you want to be around the people who, at least economically, are more similar to you, but maybe otherwise they're not the same. And so that's kind of, I guess, what the article starts with is like, how does that function? You know what I mean? For especially like artists, professionals, whatever you may do, but definitely the one that is maybe a higher income earner, like where. And this art, I should also add, I didn't say, the brother writes about Chicago. I don't remember if I said that or not. Which definitely has the scale and size of Black people that you have, a broader spectrum, what I'm saying, of how folks show up. So I guess my first question to you would be, what do you think of just the kind of the framing of the idea? Like, what were some of your first thoughts that came to mind?
Yeah, I think he cuts to a really, really salient point. And it's a really salient point, because in American cities, not necessarily metropolitan areas, there's only but so many what we would term as Black middle class neighborhoods in cities in America today. Now, let's give it some context. Many of the communities that we lionize and valorize, the Harlems, the Bronzevilles, the U Street, the Shaws, in DC, many of these places that we like to talk about. And when we talk about the good old days of being Black neighborhoods, they were multi-class Black neighborhoods, right? So they were the neighborhoods that poor people, middle class people, and even rich people lived in, because of white supremacy. You couldn't leave.
Right. You couldn't
right?
Go,
so you couldn't go nowhere. In the words of my man from Bronx Tale, now you can't leave, right? So you couldn't leave. And I think that we forget that when we talk about these traditional and these like legacy Black neighborhoods, that all the capital revolved around in the neighborhood. And our whole conversation of how long it take $1 to leave a neighborhood, which I think we'll take for another time, but I would argue it's much more complicated than people think about how long it takes $1 to stay in a neighborhood and why, right? And for that brief context, I'll share the name of a book, Our Black Year. And Our Black Year is a year of a sister from Chicago, actually, Maggie Anderson, who tried to buy everything with somebody Black for a year, and then wrote a book to talk about her experience. Challenging. I actually tried to come back and do something similar one time. And what I realized was fascinating about where we spend our money and why. And then even the other people who we think spend their money differently, what they buy from people of why they can spend more money with a particular community, and just the real estate component and a whole bunch of stuff. Leave that to the side. But that's why we can have this circular economy that I think we all want to get back to, right? We all had to live in the same neighborhood. So then now when you're talking about, Black folks, we're largely defined as living in neighborhoods with lack of infrastructure, lack of resources. At least for the last 60, 70 years, with the slums. Now it was the slums and the ghetto. Now it's the hood. Whatever monikers you want to apply to these spaces. They're like the places of last resort. Now, obviously, when I say that, we know that they're places of strong bonds, relationships, culture and resilience. But I'm saying how the neighbors are being framed, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And owing to the American, dream, where do you move when you want to get out of the place you are at? You usually move out of a city because transportation policy and, shout out to the war, they created highways to split up neighborhoods to get goods and stuff in and out of cities fast. And they had a twofer because they also created wealth for
Mm-hmm.
folks in the GI Bill and whatever have you. All this is, I both know, it's largely documented a whole bunch of places.
Yeah. Yeah.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
No, what I was just going to add on too is that there's a weird circumstance where either sometimes due to, well, especially at different points, due to the rules, the way that people typically get financed to buy homes, it can actually, those that have the means, it can sometimes make it harder to buy the home back in your community because of property value stuff and the lingering effects of redlining, which is the lingering effects of white of racism, but structural racism as it is. And so like to weigh, to think about within sort of the context of like, oh well, why don't they buy, there's some big houses on, whatever street, they can fix them up, right? You got to also remember the person that is buying them, even if they saved up the let's say they save 50 racks, right? So which in a lot of most of the parts, not most, I guess several parts of the country, it would be enough for you to have the 20% down to get a mortgage. Most places, I think a fair amount, I guess.
Yeah, fair amount.
Right. If that, big, what may, and it was funny because I was riding through Trenton when I was back in New Jersey, a couple of weeks ago, and certain spots like, I'm like, all right, that's a big giant crib. That's a crib that when it was built, it was not built as like that wasn't built for the poor rate. Like that was built.
Right.
That was that's a nice city house right there. Right. And depending on how much that is considered valued at the moment, even if I had 50 racks, I might not be able to get a loan to buy the house, to fix the house. Because they're gonna say, well, it's not gonna be worth more, than the appraisal, so we won't loan you the money, right? And the 50,000 is not enough to buy the house and fix the house. Right? Like you like there's these other rules, quite frankly, that come into like depending on, now if you just, if you just want to be there, you're like, well, I want to be there, so I'm gonna just make it work, right? Then that's a different thing. But just thinking about it from what the rules of how our money and things work in this society do impacts your decision making, or it can impact your decision making on these things too.
No, actual fact. So I just think so. From there, we get to this place where, because our neighborhoods are often defined by the lack of infrastructure and white flight, and then subsequent black flight, slash black movement, right? Because I don't want to demonize people who have made decisions to leave for whatever reason. So then you get these situations where now you have black middle class folks who, okay, do you want to live around culture? Do you want to live around your culture? Do you want to live around the energy of your people if you don't live in these cities with middle class, sprawling black middle class neighborhoods, right? Now we should not cut out, but we should think about stuff like the DMV area ranging from Baltimore County down to DC, much of it, the northern and southern Atlanta. Again, framing it, and even those places, a lot of times, the middle class black neighborhoods are in the suburbs, not necessarily the city limits, right? Um, and so thinking about that, do you want access, but also acknowledging that part of our neighborhoods is broken down, is infrastructure challenges. Part of it is, some of the, contextual intra-community violence due to, structural racism and other factors and trauma, right? So are you trying to be the person that lives in the neighborhood, you want that stuff, but also don't have the coffee shop that you might want to go to? Right. And what that means, and even when you look at community development efforts, you're often trying to think about how do you how do you get the amenities that black working and middle class folks want to utilize? And this is hoping that you have the scale and density of enough black folks to pay for it. Because another thing we should always recognize is that coffee shops and things don't exist. The idea of them, often we romanticize them in like the $5 latte, but you need a density of people coming through coffee shops to make a coffee shop work.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. And Starbucks are real estate ventures. They're not just a place to get a bad cup of coffee. Pardon me, Starbucks.
Absolutely. No, a lot of people, because Starbucks gets beat up on the actual quality and taste of the coffee. I mean, yeah. So I won't defend them. They're on their own. They got a $1 billion research development team. They can work on the flavor. But and that's something I think actually too. So in the piece, refers to sort of the idea that like, you want to be, and I think this shows up different for different people, quite, honest, probably, some folks are much more involved in their sense of status than others, right? Or their status indicators. So there's that, but there is the very real thing. And I experience even, again, for whatever one may assume about what a suburban community, when I go home to visit my folks, and I'm in Willingboro, and if I wake up in the morning and mom didn't have some kind of coffee in the house, or I didn't get some coffee, I'll be like, damn, where can I get a coffee? It's like, well, I can drive to Dunkin' Donuts, but it definitely is not the option to like, I'm going to go to the boulanger. You know what I'm saying? Like, it ain't like, oh, and today we're the croissants they're extra fresh. They're from
right.
It's not that, right? It's and nothing wrong with Dunkin' Donuts. They make a good cup of coffee. You know what I'm saying? In a donut, get you a glaze or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's delicious. But if you are a person that is like, I want to have the boutique donut experience. There was
right.
I think they've rebooted, but there's like a place out here. I mean, there's other ones I know that, but there's a company out here, Blue Star, and they make like, these fancy donuts with these different odd flavors. Oh, it's delicious. And they're, they're all right donuts. You know what I'm saying? They have a nice Meyer lemon situation, one that actually is pretty good. But the general idea of it is like, you see a Blue Star somewhere, it's like, oh, this must be a nice area. Like, yeah, they got Blue Star donuts. Right. And it's a very interesting tension when you start getting into like, because if you get whatever you at, like financial, whatever, we all take notice of what's next to us, right? In terms of the who are the services that seem to set up next to where we be at. And depending on the where you live, cities, municipalities, like we know that there are sometimes in cities, especially dense cities, especially like older East Coast Rust Belt cities, you know what I'm saying, that were built, quite frankly, or started being built at a different economic, model where maybe the car wasn't as important as other things. There is sometimes a real space issue, right? To what kind of stuff will fit, right, in the physical plant that's already there, which I think then exacerbates sort of the stark difference, right, between like if you even dropping in the University City, what can fit, which is not definitely, you can let me know. I'm pretty sure I don't think University City is considered a not, middle of the road, at least economic area of Philadelphia. It's starkly different to what you would find, in the suburbs, across, either east or west of Philadelphia in terms of, food options, stores and other stuff. But I'm sure some of the food options, retailers and stuff you would find close and adjacent to University City are way different than what's on 52nd Street. You know what I'm saying? Or, what's
absolutely. I mean,
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So there is a component of like what the physical plant will allow, but then it's also it becomes real clear that you didn't put the fancy boutique, you name it, on a street that either one is the financial reality if whatever that business is doing would make money there, but also there is a branding thing to it. I think, you know what I mean?
I mean, it's a class. I mean, again, unless you're talking about, again, certain legacy black neighborhoods or just legacy neighborhoods, because you see this in Chinatowns, you see this in quote unquote Little Italies, you see it in traditional Jewish neighborhoods. So Irish neighborhoods like Hell's Kitchen. So I don't want to put this just on race for this particular element of it, because it is a branding concept, and the idea of class that is usually talked about with like younger wealth, and more of a current kind of signature. Again, if you see a Starbucks somewhere, you don't think that. 15 years ago, you thought it meant that the rich people were coming. You don't necessarily think the rich people are coming, but you do think if you see a Dunkin' Donuts, that's more of your thing, right? But if you see, like you said, somebody doing a pour over of a coffee from, Burundi, that it tastes like grapes or some shit, right? Like, then we assume that's not for us. Uniquely, though, we black folks can get sent the message that a $5 coffee is not for us, but somehow get sent the message that a $800 belt or $500 belt is for us.
Right.
Like, how do you? So we just think about how folks have been the corporate space has been so smart to send you the fact that no, you don't need a juice or you don't need this coffee. That's not for you. That's for white people. But the Gucci, the new, whatever, shout out to Dapper Dan. So I'm not sticking, I'm not trying to come at Gucci or Louis Vuitton. But that this idea, I'll use another one, Kenzo or, Amiri jeans, like literally a pair of jeans that now these aspirational things are for you, but not this cup of coffee. So I think we have this challenge as it pertains to neighborhoods, right? Because everyone will go to the mall to buy that very same thing we're talking about. But if you see that store in your neighborhood, even if you like that thing, and you or us as being authentically black, for whatever that means, for whatever we need to say about that the coffee is a problem, but the other stuff ain't, right? And so, that's where I think we get this hood affluent where you live there, but acknowledge that the proximity to your people can be a challenge with infrastructure and sometimes other situational elements, or the other element of the reflected privilege where you share economic interests and maybe some social interests in amenities, but it doesn't share in any way the broader cultural context of where you inhabit.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there looking at it too, and just some of the things that it got me thinking about. Or yeah, I guess I'll pose the question and I'll answer for myself first, because two of the things he kind of gets to is like, is one choice better than the other? Or does the choice even matter? Right? Does one, what are some of those thoughts? And like, I try to think about this stuff like strategies, right? And like how do we win this scenario in a broader context? How do you like what does it mean to have your own stability and order, right? And then what do you gain, what do you lose by however you've situated yourself within this system, this society that we exist in, right? And so I try to go to what's my own arc, right? And one of the things I realized and thought about this weekend, or being back after going home for a week, was that I am comfortable and familiar with certain suburban settings, right? But the last few years I've come to more fully feel how detached where I specifically grew up is from anywhere else. It's sort of just like an island of, of houses and some shopping centers, right? And it's and I was talking to my mom, and she was talking about when she decided to move us there, with my grandma, like, she had friends and friends who were really like mad, like don't leave, because definitely like a don't leave the city, like don't leave, like stay up here, right? And there was a number of economic factors that influence my mom's decision. And there's parts of it that I told her, I'm like, I thought moved to a pretty good situation, at least for us at the time, educationally. I'm still in predominantly black schools, like way not just predominantly black. Like, it was 16 black children and then three other people, 4 or 5 other people, which I think it may be a rarity. But also I was dwelling on the idea that certain aspects of the communities that we live in when we live in them are not necessarily historically repeating patterns, meaning the conditions and everything that were going on when you think of, and I don't know if Mount Airy was as nice as it was rumored to be when I was a kid, but when I would hear about Mount Airy and Philly, I'm like, oh man, Mount Airy, they up there. I heard that's the fanciest, nicest place to live if you're black. You know what I'm saying? Or certain, Sugar Hill, in Harlem, or was it Jamaica, Queens, certain parts of Queens. Like it was neighborhoods, areas that you heard about black people living around other black people, and living wealthy. And in Willingboro, people perceived it as like, oh yeah, and even I remember the experience of the mix of those of us who have moved there, at whatever point, and folks that were born, we perceived as born there, but everyone sort of having this idea that you were from Willingboro, you were actually from this other place. But then, there was some level of, you thought something happened for y'all that y'all were living there versus wherever you came from. Right. And it's a very weird dynamic.
I mean, so I think one, it's important for the listeners to get some context for Willingboro as like, whether it was planned to be the first black suburb or it quickly became the first black suburb. And for folks who want to study the whole history of Levittown and, Levittown in Pennsylvania and in Levittown in New York, because I think sometimes we just talk about Levittown and one or the other. But, again, I think we were one of the unique places that by the 80s, there was already this idea that there were a number of black suburbs, right? But Yaden for us and some other places. But the difference with Willingboro was it wasn't directly connected to another black place.
Yeah.
Which we always thought was different, because it's one thing to say, okay, that's a black suburb because they moved up the street. And then, as my mother would always say, your cousins followed you. Right? That's one thing.
Yeah.
But it's another thing when like somebody moves to a place that is not connected to anything as a actual place. So for us, that was in our understanding of time of people in place. That was like you made it, right? Like, 'cause how could you get to a place that you had to drive to, right? like who moves to a place that everybody has to drive to? Like, you're rich, right? And so I think that those are the distinctions, to your point, between thinking about that kind of neighborhood versus thinking about the Mount Airy's, the Jamaica, St. Albans in Queens, that enclave of Sugar Hill and Strivers Row, right? Specifically Mount Airy was and this is also, I think, part of the demographic shift in America that gets downplayed when we talk about place. And I mean this on both sides, because the reality is place changes.
Yeah.
Place doesn't stay the same forever, not in America. So, I thinking that a neighborhood's going to be the same way for 80 or 90 years, unless it's some really specific stuff around historic preservation, and that's probably not going to happen. Like, the neighborhood's going to change a little bit, right? So anyway, Mount Airy was one of the first places in Philly that, black folks could move, because there was a Quaker population and also was a considerable Jewish population. So our understanding of, kind of black Jewish relationships at that time was, okay, well, if Jews live there, then black folks can start moving up there. right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how Winfield becomes Winfield. That's how Mount Airy. So those were very specific to like, it can be 20 or 30 or 40%, 20, 30% black. And the next thing will be 60% black. And we think it's a black place, even though it's not necessarily a black place.
Mm-hmm.
When the records show once something becomes a plurality of black people and white people perceive it as being a black place.
Yeah.
Even though it's not necessarily a black place.
Yeah, and I just add, I don't think Willingboro actually became like actually by demographics a black place until sometime in the 90s. But by the time school age,
wow,
you know what I'm saying, it definitely, I assumed it was, right? But I think it might not have been, deep into the 90s, but because even as of the late 80s, a significant amount of the graduating classes, like at least older classes, like in the late 80s, like it wasn't as many. By the time I got to high school, by the time I graduated high school, it was like, yeah, it was speckles of white folks around. But I remember, when we first moved there, even just seeing, more white people, more white folks, more young white people, but that again changing rapidly. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, by the time I got out of high school, it ain't like that no more. It's, and a lot of those families moved to further suburbs, you know what I'm saying, in South Jersey and what have you.
And I think that's a part of the story, right? And I think that, to add on, that's a part of the story that we have to keep central. And I'm not going to look at it negatively. I'm not going to look at the bottom of the 8 of it. I'm just going to say that these places do change, and often our perception of what is black or what is white it's a particular vision of it. And then the market, there's a space where the market perceives the psychology of the neighborhood and then starts to sell things at a certain clip, right? And then that changes it. And on the flip side, there's a place where, to you, like you added on before, a neighborhood might be 75% black, right? So do you think it's black? And then if it becomes 70% black because some black folks move to another neighborhood that is changing, right? Then other people move in because you have Victorian homes and they can get a loan from the bank, or they're willing to live inside of a house that's not quite finished for a couple months, right? And we know, just telling the truth on black folks, we know that it's typology where you can't really be taking your family and the house ain't ready for 6-9 months. It's a good chance that your lady ain't going for that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like living in the money pit. You know what I'm saying? So while other bugs is moving into a crib, the crib ain't done and the bathroom is a wreck. You know what I mean? Like, they ain't living in a house where the bathroom ain't finished, man. So, there are some psychological markers on it as well. But I just thought that the idea of this tension that middle class black folks have. And I also want to make this distinction that it doesn't mean it's the thing. It doesn't mean it's a tension when it comes to destination conversations, meaning like you could see you see it when we was in Chicago, you see it all over the country. You have these places where black folks are still destinations for middle class black people who maybe were from a neighborhood or from the area. They just don't live there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So this isn't like the destination conversation. This is the actual where you lay your head conversation. But I do think there's still a lot of the infrastructure for middle class black folks and sometimes even wealthy black folks in the proximity to black neighborhoods. But it's just a difference of, did you ride there to eat tonight, or do you live around the corner from said thing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this, because I think he and the piece kind of goes into like the strategy or like the idea of like which one is better, this or that. What to you, like, do you think that this is something that like, where would this land on the like we should strive for this or for that, or like what do you gain from just like approaching the idea of like making places work for Black people in a more holistic way, right? Meaning you can find that balance, making, and I say places in the like regions of a country, regions, of or the area of municipality or city, because I think there's an aspect of at least our future that is we have to figure out some sort of balance between um that what you even described, that like I may frequent the place over here where I grew up or came from, or at least I have cultural family ties to, but the other dynamics mean I may not live there, right? But that is still important to me, right? And then I suppose, like, is there a prescription of some sort, like, to look at with what might be the way these things could be different going
Yeah,
forward?
I mean, I think there's an either or, because I think, like so much you and I talk about when we build about just, it's really about what are you trying to get to,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think there is a strong psychic reality to one, not only Black middle class neighborhoods, but also Black multi-class neighborhoods. I think there's a strong psychic thing that happens there. I think it's important for children of all backgrounds to see people being successful,
Mm-hmm.
right? See Black folks being successful. I think it's important for everyone to see Black folks being successful. That's normalized. That's
Mm-hmm.
not on TV. It ain't. It ain't. Blackish. It ain't.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? The Cosby Show. It ain't. Your favorite Negro on television. Like, it's someone to live next to you that's Black, and maybe even blackity black. I'm saying this for white people. It's important for them to see that. Um, and it's very important for Black folks of all backgrounds to see Black folks being successful, because it normalizes possibility. One of the most, I think, psychic challenges that we have in our neighborhoods is that we've normalized lack of success.
Mm-hmm.
And we've actually socialized the idea that to be successful, you have to leave this place and
Mm-hmm.
you have to move somewhere where the population is not majority you. That's where that race and class becomes synonymous.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important. I think there is a thing where you have to foster it. Now, can you I don't think you can artificially foster it. That's number one. And I think community development strategies in Black neighborhoods have proven you can't necessarily artificially do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I
It's
feel you.
it's not all a city program. It has to be where Black folks decide to spend their money with agency,
Mm-hmm.
not an elected official's vision of what this could look like. Now they can set the tone, they can set the terms, they can create the platform,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's going to have to be some private capital in decisions that people are making. So I do think there are possibilities. I also think that there's some there's some secondary challenges that affect the primary challenge. And I'll stop after this. After one thing, meaning schools often impact this conversation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because even a lot of times, if we can live with the challenges that we grow up around, we might live with, it might be some stuff going on down the street, that kind of stuff, right? No one can live with their children getting substandard education.
Yeah.
And so it starts to be a decision of, for a lot of folks, am I going to pay for the house or am I going to pay for the private school?
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, it's smarter to pay for the house than it is to pay for the private school. Just as a decision
Mm-hmm.
making, like from a decision making vantage point. So that's one of the secondary challenges we will continue to have around this conversation. The research shows that even in Black middle class, highly performing, like wealthy Black middle class municipalities, like Prince George's County in
Mm-hmm.
DC or Maryland, the schools still suffer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there is that conversation. So I think it has to be a market. It has to be thinking about these secondary issues, and then again, I do think it's important for us to socialize in neighborhoods that aren't majority Black, because that's also part of the segregation conversation, not segregation like, hey, you can bring me some cookies, but the segregation of not normalizing Black success and not normalizing that Black people are not victims.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think I do think it's both. I think when you get scale in cities or when you get scale in regions, and I think this plays out from an economic development perspective because the scale of Atlanta, for example, now compounds itself. I would say the two places that we are currently in, the lack of density of scale of Pittsburgh, as far as Black folks, along with a host of other challenges,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the Portland area, right, does not compound itself with folks coming to bring their capital and resources to these places
Mm-hmm.
because they don't think these places are places they're going to flourish.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think it becomes easier when people, and that's where, you and I both know half of the people I went to high school with ended up in the DMV.
Yeah.
Even though Philadelphia, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Philadelphia has a robust Black community that you could come back to be a part of. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. But folks still ended up in Maryland and DC, right? In Virginia. So it shows you that yes, could you have lived in a Black middle class place in Philadelphia? They absolutely could have, right? But there was some other pool, some other psychological pool, and some other resource and other reason that that area became a place where you're getting kind of this density of capital and density of also education, frankly, moving to these places.
Yeah. So. Well, and I think some of my thoughts around that is like things to bear in mind, right? And it's something actually he points out in the thing that like, Black people, our homes, if they're in what's perceived as a Black neighborhood, are devalued. And that's no matter what the type of house they are. If that's a Black neighborhood in a city, a Black suburban neighborhood, and probably, I'm pretty sure I haven't read anybody's reports on it, but I would imagine a Black rural environment, somehow the land will be like, oh yeah, that's probably, sometimes it may in fact be, poor, lower quality soils or drainage or whatever, dynamics and stuff, because that also is a reality of, living in a racist system that, the same rules, the rules to be able to protect the value of your land and what your land can do don't stop and start with, mortgage lending. And so when you like start thinking about the things that there are hard components to like something being a sort of vibrant place of commerce, right? And that I think there's a mental shift when we think, especially from one of the piece that this is speaking to, which is like a lifestyle conversation. This is not necessarily a conversation about the nature of our logistics infrastructure and like manufacturing capacity and like all those kind of things, which are important things, but that's not really this conversation. And what this piece was bringing up is sort of the lifestyle aspect of whatever you do, where you want to situate yourself to like live the life that you enjoy, so to speak, or is rewarding to you. And that some of these spaces, because of our society's history of racism, is why we don't frame them as just like, oh, that's a nice restaurant strip, but it's a restaurant strip that is maybe is white or is associated with white people or not associated with, you name it. There's that aspect, but there is a reality that whatever places that folks would want to frequent need to actually make money. They need to have the customers base. They need to have the mix of people that want to engage in that activity coming through. So if you can't just go like, well, they need a supermarket, so we're going to put a supermarket in, right? I mean, like you can get the capital and do all this stuff and put it in.
And it'll fail.
But it'll fail.
I've seen it over and over again. And again, it's like, unless you're going to just make sure the supermarket stays open, and even you're not going to be able to do that for so long, because eventually, and I'm not, not here to tout the hidden hand of the market, but it's just like the reality of it will be people won't shop there, it will close. Yeah. So it does have to be the factors that put it in play that allow that business to be successful.
Yeah. And then so there's like, to me, is a conversation of sort of like determination in terms of like what are the ways that we can hold, you can, if a group of people have a vision for their neighborhood, right? Especially if we're thinking about like legacy Black communities, right? And they're like, we want this to be this way. So, I there, to me, there has to be some level of collective intention that is able to express itself um, in in a hard planning kind of way, right? Like in a, like, what is stuff zoned and what are we allowed to do, what are we not allowed to do, what do the rules say? Um, and then I think there's an aspect of like someone got to come up with some ideas that actually work for where we're at, like and are suitable to where this place is at, with the idea that these may change if this goes well, right? Like, so if you got an old school tight city block, commercial strip, you know what I mean, where the 20 by 20 by 20 by 10 or whatever. I can't remember the space between at the front of the store and the width of the door, right? Like, what can fit in those storefronts that would be meaningful to the people that are close proximity, and to what degree would other people, travel to that place either to do commerce, you know what I mean, or to partake of the services or goods that are there, right? If it's some other form of the way the space moves, but it needs to be some balance between like an intentional planning and then somebody that's like, yeah, I'm actually willing to risk my well-being and future on being the person that owns this business, right? Or us as a group or a collective of people. And then you do need the damn rules to not be kicking you in the butt, in terms of being able to access capital. But I mean, we know all those things. But I think that then there is that psychic social piece of like, how do you bring the confluence of people who are there, that have been there, like that they have ownership and are a part of it, but also folks that feel connected to that space or from that neighborhood or have familial or other ties in it. And so then they're engaged. And then, quite frankly, if you got a product or service that you're selling, most of the time you probably would do well to sell to whoever wants to buy it. And meaning, so if folks that ain't from around here or didn't traditionally exist or add on or be in that space, when they come in, how are they coming in, right? In what way are they being oriented to come in? Is there some sort of, what is the coordination? And I think a lot of times those things need to be on the same page. And or at least there needs to be some, I don't, and I don't have an answer. I'm just saying that I think somehow to tie those things in. And then I think, though, for the other piece, that idea that I had in my head was thinking about the way prices, relative value of things. It's not like our society doesn't look at the value of a house based on the raw materials it took to build it. We look at it with all these other factors, from proximity to perceived value of the schools to all the things, and that particularly predominantly white people set the price. I mean, white decisions set the price. And so, knowing that, is there a strategy? Is there a ratio of Black person? We go like, well, maybe not. Maybe most of the family stays closer to this neighborhood, but a couple people in the family, you buy a house over there, so we can balance out sort of our access to reasonable prices, so we can move sort of resources between each other in some ways. There's some sort of collective strategy. Is there a thought, instead of if like, is it a better decision if you were like a African American entrepreneur that was like, yeah, I want to open up this kind of place that does this other thing, but is it a better strategy to just open it where the best market is for that thing, and then hopefully return, maybe your operations and stuff are located in your traditional community, as opposed to having the other way around, right? I don't know. Like, these are the kind of thoughts that this piece put me in the mind state of. And then also, I would say, being my own kind of particular path and navigation through Blackness growing up, um, as much as I love where I came from and my folks, I don't really have no allegiance to geography because I just try to stay connected to people via being me. And within some degrees of experience, meaning that there's definitely some places I ain't moving, but there's more places like I ain't moving over there than the other side, like where it's like, because as I like to say, they got to deal with me as much as people worry what they gonna do to you, just what they got. I'm gonna be out there. I don't know what they gonna do. You know what I'm saying? They need to get ready. That's my street now that I live there. But so that's my brain.
Yeah, no, man, no. I think just to close. I think you bring up some good points. Obviously, we don't have it figured out. There's some places that things are happening, and then there's some challenges in those places, both by perception and reality. Um, and I think there's also a part of this that's then just connected to the broader economic mobility of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you have millions of people who don't have access to economic mobility, their sense of place will be defined by what you perceive they buy. And then that will shift a whole host of things. And if it's schools, if it's job programs, if it's a whole host of things, I don't want to, be prescriptive, but there has to be a conversation about economic mobility so that communities actually change from within and don't have to have external change, whether black or white.
Mm.
Right? Because there is such a thing as black on as inter-community or intra-community gentrification.
Mm-hmm.
And now you might just call it neighborhood change, and that's fine. And often, the research shows that the black folks that come in don't get like these huge bounce benefits from their hood affluence. But there is that thing too where, you could move into a neighborhood, but you also know that if it was majority black, another person very well may have been displaced,
mm-hmm.
or they may have chosen to move, and that's just part of again what we have to understand the scale. So I think folks, please check the articles out, and also check him out. He talks about urbanism. I've been honored to be featured as a black urbanist. You should know. I don't even call myself an urbanist, but whatever.
Urbanist, man.
But I think, yeah, man. Again, that's why I was saying in the beginning, like you don't even call yourself like black folks like I care about the community. I care about people in place. And everybody else like, you mean an urbanist? Like, no, I'm not an urbanist. I just care about people in place.
Yeah.
That kind of makes you an urbanist. Yeah. And I think black folks, we have to be careful hiding from that. Mm-hmm. Because if we care about our communities and we care about how it looks, we care about public domain, we care about how it feels, then you are an urbanist, and be okay with that. So I got to talk to myself. I'm going to be okay with the fact that I'm an urbanist. All right.
Indeed. Another thing else I would just add is, I think it's really good too. There's a value in working to try to see the spaces that we live in with as many other factors as you can, that as you can. You know what I mean? Like just broadening your lens some and sometimes just taking a thought to, right, what was this place before my community called this our community, right? And how do those the intentions, either from the physical, again, the physical plant and infrastructure, how that has shaped the way this looks and works. And then adding to that, what are the ways, if we wanted to be different or we wanted to go somewhere else, how do we have a conversation about that? How do we engage in that? And then what are the rules that impact it? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are the things that make these visions either challenging or possible? You know what I mean? And also, whoever's, if y'all are about to break bread, or you just went to take that walk with your cousin and you on your way back, You know what I'm saying? You know, when you had that family member that maybe has the, you know, the bigger dining room or has the more space or whatever is home. You know what I'm saying? I mean, take a minute to reflect on that, like, where y'all are at and why this is the place that you have gathered with the folks that you've gathered, if you gather it at all. If you're just doing some other stuff, you know what I mean, that's also cool. You know what I'm saying? You have no obligation to partake of any of these activities. That's just justice.
Absolutely.
That's justice.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So with that, let's say anything else. I'm gonna say, I think we're good.
My man.
All right. So with that, I'm saying peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to you, the listeners. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Try to record regularly, and as I'm in this time of transition, and we are moving into the cool, quiet months of the fall and the soon-to-be here winter. I hope that we bring something warm and satisfying to your ear. We try to record regularly, and the thing I ask for is your support, primarily in the way of sharing. If you want to go a little further, step farther, become a subscriber on Patreon. Just search Justice Rajee, and you can add a little something every month to the Creative Kitty. But you can also very much support the show by copping a sweatshirt. But even more and easy, cost you nothing, is rate, subscribe, man. Rate, subscribe. Even if this feed changes up, when I launch the change up, however that goes, jump on, be one of the first people. Because, algorithm gives a bump to newness. It doesn't respect the old. But in any event, thank you for listening. I hope you had a safe and quiet, week there with the Thanksgiving and all that. So I'm not going to get into that too much. But again, thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for participating. Be well. Peace.